Okay. So now that we're recording, let's restart. Luckily, we didn't go too far. So we're here because it was part of a generous invitation of a festival called the Agile 20 Reflect, which is um, a unique initiative to take a month-long journey and hear how people perceive the state of agility today, in the past, in the future, and invite people in from a lot of places, countries, cultures, levels. I don't know if there's levels there, but like levels of maturity of agility, people who don't know a lot about it, people who have been in this place for years and years. And perhaps to enhance the harmony is a word that I love to use um, in the agile community, whatever the agile community is. So the first thing I would love to say is a big thank you for this festival, for providing the space, because spaces are I think one of the most important tools that we have in any sort of agile journey is creating a space. So this is one. And two, my idea for this session was inspired by a tale that I'll tell in a few minutes, and the hints of which you can see in my background, about three um, Eastern philosophy currents, or I don't know how to call that, three sort of different Eastern philosophies that I think had an impact on the agile philosophy, even if not admittedly so. And I think it's important to take a look back in the deep roots of agility, not in the roots of what started 20 years ago, but the roots of what started thousands of years ago, to understand better where we are and where we want to go, where we come from. Um, About me, my name is Dov. I'm an agile coach, and I, at some point in my journey, I fell in love with something called the Book of Tao, or Taoism, and I realized that it has a big connection to the other path that I'm following, which is an agile, uh, a change agent, if you want. And then I ran into a story. In fact, I ran into this story being told by Peter, who will introduce himself. And then, in the context of the festival, I thought that the story is a great starting point for what I want to do today. But before we go in there, I would like to introduce the three other participants that I invited. One to represent in a vague way. I'll say something about that later. Each hero of the small story that I'm going to tell. So before I tell the story, would you mind introducing yourself?
And now we all wait for someone else to go first. Hi, I'm Nick Argel, um, and my journey into Eastern philosophy began when my father got a job in Beijing in 1984, and we had a very affluent sort of situation, and we had servants in the house and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I noticed was that the people that my family employed seemed to be much happier than my family, and that piqued my curiosity, and I have been interested in Eastern philosophy since then. My interest in agility or in ways of developing software and maintaining software really got started in 91, when I was responsible for maintaining a piece of software that wasn't terribly reliable. And then I didn't start my degree until 94, and I got trained in these formal methods, and I thought, oh my God, formal methods are going to save me from all of the hell that I had experienced prior to this point. And then I went to work actually out in industry. And I said, okay, well, let's write a requirements document and a design document. They said, we don't have time for that. We need the software yesterday, so get coding. And resolving that tension has always been something that is of great interest to me. Today, I'm representing Kung Fu, and he's a figure who's very much an advocate for order and discipline. And I'll let someone else go first. You go next now.
Oh, Nick, that's a really I like your story, because I'm meeting you here for the first time in a way, and somehow it reminds me a bit of my own journey, which is like especially with Australia being dominant. Actually, my first footstep into Asia was through Australia. So I came to Australia and I stepped off Darwin, caught the plane, arrived in Indonesia, and then started my Asian journey. And when I was in Australia, it's actually where I learned to meditate. So it was my springboard into that whole world. And when I did my first meditation course in Australia, in Perth, although I'm English and I live in the Netherlands, I wanted to become a monk straight away. And although that took a few more years to do, going through Asia, and yeah, I went overland back to Europe over a number of years, and but the calling to become a monk was very strong, and that's what propelled me. So I did. I came back to England and I became a Buddhist monk, and I lived in a monastery in England for 10 years, and then I did 5 years. I traveled around the world, and actually I went back to Australia. I was so grateful for that land and the people there that I felt I should go back and do something for Australia. So actually I ended up back in Perth again, and that's also where I disrobed. And interestingly, I started my journey at one end of the road in Perth, literally on the same road, and I disrobed at the other end of the road as a monk. And I did that 5 years ago. So after I disrobed, I thought, what can I do with my life? And I'd already been sort of working in businesses as a monk. People invite me in Australia. And so I set myself up as an executive coach, and I moved to the Netherlands because this picture behind me is where I live, and it reminds me of Australia, the big wide open sky. And when I came here, I kept hearing about Agile and Scrum and all this stuff, and then all the people that I were working with were interested in this, and I knew nothing really about it because I'd been not caught up in that stuff, although I had a degree in AI. So I became a Scrum Master. I did the weekend trip, the 2-day course, and got involved with all of that, and suddenly realized I've been doing this for years. The events that I ran at the monastery as a monk were all agile, self-organizing, and so I guess, I'm really passionate, I guess, about the agility mindset. And today I represent, I bring Buddhism. So that's my little introduction.
Okay. I'm going to try and make this concise, and I'm going to fail horribly. So I'll begin sort of where Nick began. My late father left me a library and not much else. And in the library, there were these 3 English translations of Lao Tzu. And so he'd never discussed the book with me, but we both enjoyed the Tony Randall movie, the 7 Faces of Dr. Lao, which is what I've sampled for the image behind me. And Dob was picking me up before we started that Lao Tzu is supposed to have ridden off on an ox, but I like donkeys, and donkeys will come back into the story. Anyway, so I had these 3 translations, and I thought, well, it must have been important to him for him to have 3 translations. I looked at them side by side, and they were all completely different to each other. I couldn't believe these were 3 translations of the same book. So I started sort of making notes on this, and this was early days of the internet, and the Australian National University had started a Sinology list on Taoism, and they had real sinology professors on there. And a mate of mine introduced me to it and said, well, we've been making notes on this. Why don't you pop it up and see what they think? And they tore it to shreds, rubbish, nonsense, full of crap. Of course, they were right. I was a computer science AI guy too. But I went, wow, I just learned a lot. I'm going to try again. So I took what they had said and I tried to condense my notes with what they had said and popped that up again, and they tore it to shreds again. And that kept happening for about 3 years. And by the end of the 3 years, either they were bored with correcting me or what I had as an interpolation, not a translation, was not completely objectionable. So I went, okay, great. What I do with that? It's not exactly what I'm doing for a living. I'll put a GNU public license on it and I'll send it out into the world and somebody else can improve it. And I thought that would happen. And it didn't exactly happen the way I thought it was going to happen. Well, one of the things that surprised me was there were a bunch of Chinese sites that started putting this up as the official English translation of Lao Tzu. And I kept on, I was horrified by this and saying, no, it's not a translation. But then it got worse. A guy contacted me, very nice man named Oliver Benjamin. And Oliver said, look, you don't know me, but I want to start a religion based on the Big Lebowski. And I want to use your translation of Lao Tzu as the Bible, the Dudist Bible, the Dude De Ching. And can I do that? And I said, well, as long as you don't sell it, you can, because it's got a GNU public license. And he said, yeah, don't need to sell that. And what he started selling instead, won't surprise any agilists, he started selling certificates, Dudist priest certificates. And for $20 a pop, it entitled you to marry people. And he sold about 500,000 of those last time I looked. So he got quite wealthy off of that. And then I began to think maybe I need to revisit this work because it keeps being adapted. And there are a whole bunch of iPhone apps that used it without paying respects to the license and so on. I thought, well, maybe I should do this properly. Now, this is where we get back to donkeys again. It so happened that I was chief architect for an AI kind of startup in Southern California that went belly up after about 2.5 years of struggle. And all of the IP went into someone's garage and everything wound up in courts. And I went back to Australia and I bought a tea house and on 5 acres in Tweedshire. And the tea house came with, let's see if I can reach around here. Came with, if I can manage to get it to show up.
Your computer green screen is stuffing that up a bit.
You can still see it. So that's Josephine, as painted by a friend of mine. And Josephine came with the place. And so I had a bit of time on my hands. And I decided I was going to try and do this properly. And I got a whole bunch of transliterations and dictionaries and started going pictogram by pictogram and wound up producing a thing that these days I call the Agile DAO. I told you I was going to fail at doing this in a concise way because I decided that the term Sheng Ren, which is usually translated as the sage, literally the lively ones, at least that's one translation, the lively ones, it's talking about agile. This whole book's about agile. So then I bumped into Dov and he decided to do a podcast based on that translation. And here I am. Oh, I did a whole bunch of agile things in the meanwhile. Okay, done.
So now thank you for passing the ball back to me. And one of the stories that I first got introduced to by you is a Taoist tale. And I would like to start by taking it as such. So it's a tale that's told from the Taoist perspective, and of course the Taoist figure there is the hero, and it's a very short. In fact, it's not even a tale; it's a picture, which is depicted a lot of times in like there's a lot of ancient and more modern pictures, like you can see here in the background some of them. 3 old men or 3 grown men dipping their finger in a bucket full of vinegar, and it's called the vinegar tasters. And one man tastes it, and he has an expression of as if what he tastes is sour. And the other one tastes it, and the expression is as if what he tastes is bitter. And the other one is just smiling. And you can guess that the smiling one is Lao Tzu, who is the like the Taoist main figure, because as I said, it's a Taoist tale. And the analogy there is that in the Confucian view of the world, things are, I would say, to be corrected. There is a state which is perfect, and the vinegar is not a good wine. It lacks something to be a good wine. And so this is the sour part. The bitter part is referred to Buddha, who says life is suffering, and our goal is to transcend all of this. And the Taoist part, of course, which the only one who is positive in this story, or the one which is most positive, says this is great. Like when Peter told me this first, Lao Tzu says, this would be great with some pickles. Okay, so it's a stance of accepting what is as the only perfect state that can be at this moment. That's the way I perceive it. And already I opened the stage. Do you have some nuances or corrections to what I just said?
So I remember when I consented to the promotional material for this session, it said Confucius didn't like the vinegar because he had a specification and it didn't meet the specification. And that's the sort of superficial analysis of events that I'm accustomed to receiving from software vendors. So let me just give you a little bit of a customer Confucius perspective here. I was thirsty, and I said, I want a cup of tea. And you, the vendor, said to me, I've got something better. And I said, well, I like things that are better, fair enough. And you served me this vinegar. I wanted a cup of tea because I was thirsty and dehydrated, and you cannot drink quantities of vinegar and resolve your thirst. So it's not, you're blaming the spec for this. The spec is not the problem. Your failure to understand the reasoning behind the spec is why I'm bitter about all of this. And so that's what I wanted. That's why I reserved a little time after the stories, because I wanted to offer that perspective in terms of in the Confucian analysis. It's not, we can be perceived to be hung up on the details. And certainly we know that the details can mean something. And the debates that I've had with Peter about the picture with the tadpoles here may or may not be rehashed today. But when I get angry with someone because they have messed with this picture, it's because, to me, this picture is the summary of about 6 hours worth of instruction that I received. And when you change the picture, you change what it means.
Any other reservation to the story? Yes.
Well, I was going to assume that Nick was wanting a response from me, but maybe if we're going to sort of stick to the form of the story, we should let Amma have a go before I duck in. He might be able to harmonize the whole thing.
Well, in a way, it's a story, isn't it? That's what we've got to work with. We weren't really there, so who knows? I don't know whether the story's true or not. I don't even know if the Buddha was a real person or not, or whether if there was a person like that. All I know is what I know from my own experience was that I just took some teachings and applied them to my life and seemed to work for me. So it seems what's interesting is that in this context, we've each taken a particular approach and it seems to have worked for us. That's kind of joyous, isn't it?
Yeah. And this is something that I forgot to mention, at least when we're recording. When I invited you three, I invited you because each one of you has a touch of one of the characters, but I invited you as yourself. I'm not inviting you to represent any rigid view. So you can play between these two chairs, either to say, no, the character that I was invited in the name of would have said this, or in my experience, I have what I think is this, and I'm not, or even I don't know what I don't know Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu would have said. I think that. So thank you for reminding me, Amma. You're not. Don't feel obliged to represent something bigger than your experience. Okay.
Thank you.
And this goes to all of you. Anything else about the story? So Peter, yeah, I'm
Well,
sure
I
you had
do
something to
like where
comment.
Amma went
Yeah.
with it because it's very, um, I think it kind of expresses a Buddhist zeitgeist without pulling Buddha into it. So we've kind of already killed him, so that's good. It's just a story. And for that matter, Lao Tzu is definitely just a story. The term means literally the old philosopher or the old philosophy. And there's a pretty decent body of evidence that suggests that Lao Tzu didn't start in China anyway, that there's affiliation with the Bhagavad Gita we talked about at last week's Agile Dao session. But I really like the idea that it's the story is often the problem. And if we just go, well, look, it's just a story, it doesn't matter, then we give people a way to go, oh, good, what actually does matter at the moment, and to get back to the moment. But getting back to what Nick was saying, if we play with the story, um, I was originally suggesting we call this session the Vinegar Testers because I thought agile people might be interested in testing and they might not be very interested in Eastern philosophy, but it kind of is a testing story, and I was trying to suggest that you often have customers who will go, well, look, I was thirsty for this, and when we say customers, well, we have a choice of customers. There are customers who have pickles or who fry potatoes or a salad or something for whom vinegar would be really useful. So if we want to think about business throughput, maybe the problem that our systems solve isn't necessarily the problem that a particular customer segment holds dear, and maybe that doesn't matter. It might be more important from a business throughput perspective to go, well, okay, we've got a set of systems and a bunch of people who are delivering them. And by systems, it could be fry cooks flipping hamburgers. What we want to do is make certain that our approach to this is going to be good for business. After that, it doesn't matter so much.
Okay, so so far we didn't say anything about agility. We talked about the story, and now about connecting the story to why we're here in this festival.
Well, hang on. I think I would disagree with you, Dov, because I would suggest
it's not your role to disagree. It's Nick's role to disagree.
That's all right. He'll go.
I agree.
Yeah. So business agility, the capability to respond to changing market conditions. If the market doesn't want, one market segment doesn't want vinegar, then responding to changing market conditions would involve marketing to a segment that does. So I think that's agile. No?
So yes, I stand corrected. But I want to make the connection more explicit. My idea is that as the festival invites us, we can examine the past, present, and future of agility in the more traditional sense. So agility in the context of business, agility in the world of industry, agility in the world of manufacturing, software and not software, through these three completing in different lenses. Okay, so perhaps let's start by agility's past. Where would you date the sort of starting point?
I mean, there's there's the agile movement, which, if we accept the terms of the festival that we're part of, then there was a manifesto signed in 2001 that is relevant to identifying when things started. In terms of when did we start wanting to build software really quickly, I suspect that might have been taking place very earnestly in the 1940s. When there were some German codes that needed to be decrypted in a terrible hurry, and they didn't know how to build the software, and they were going as fast as they could. In terms of me personally, 1998 was probably the time where I was forced to question formal methods, having really strongly embraced them. I was told by the finance director that, listen, we have a payroll of $10,000 that we have to, it was a small business, we have a payroll of $10,000 we have to achieve at the end of the month. We have $5,000 in the bank. You need to ship an update so that the following customers will pay their invoices. Otherwise, nobody gets paid. And that was when I became very profoundly interested in being able to achieve time box deadlines and that sort of thing.
Oh, okay, I'll break.
I can fight you all harder if you want.
I'd go with what Dov said. I think we can trace a lineage from the ancient Chinese via the Jesuit priests that brought translations of the I Ching and the Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu into Austria in the 17th, I think, 17th, 18th century. And then Leibniz then picked those up, and they inspired his invention of the binary number system and the first mechanical computers. And we can think then that, gee, maybe the way that we went about solving problems, our entire engineering lineage derives from these ideas. And whether you're trying to figure out where cannonballs are going to land, or whether you're trying to figure out, well, how do we retain the market for our iPhone app, Agile is still a handy kind of an approach. So maybe we could think that there's kind of a touchy-feely bridge when you get to the 40s, 50s, 60s, but I think all of that stuff is drawing on deeper threads.
That's really interesting, Peter. I didn't know that. I didn't know that influence. Really interesting. I just thinking that for me, agility is from the past is us. So at a cellular level, we are agility, and so it's always been there. Our way that we respond on a cellular level, we can't not do it. We might choose not to do it from the thinking point of view, but in a way, the pandemic that we're having at the moment is an agility problem, and both on a person and again on a cellular level. So I think there's a long history of it. And we're I guess at the right now for me, and well, that's the future. Sorry, past. Yes, past. I think it's we're sort of hardwired for it. Yeah.
I love that view, Amma. I think there's a line in Lao Tzu about, I cannot quote it directly, but basically of outer chaos, your cradle was made. That the way that physics works, the interplay of form and information, favors agility. It's an evolutionary advantage right from the physical fundamentals before we even get to replicating molecules.
Yeah. And it's
Has the-
interesting why we don't go with that, though, isn't it? Like, if it isn't we're sort of set up for it. Why has it taken us so long as a species to bring it into the world? You know what I mean? You know, like on a thinking level, not on a cellular thing, but actually something that we share with one another. Why has it taken so long?
We keep doing really well. Like
For some definition, really well.
Like if you, but I mean, if you look at the homicide rate and the way that it is constantly halving, we are actually getting much better at not killing each other. And I think that whether we murder each other or not is a useful indicator of our levels of cooperation. And it's certainly very easy to get frustrated. And when you read the Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, and you know, when I know that when Peter sees it, he sees a sort of a spiritual thing. When I read it, I read what I find, because everyone who translates the Tao Te Ching finds what they are looking for. When I read it, I'm looking for pragmatic advice. And the advice that I find in the Tao Te Ching is how to cope in a bureaucracy that is controlled by a tyrant. And the fact that that advice remains relevant today is, to some extent, a tragedy. But that said, we tend not to be executed for disobedience by corporations. And so there's some indicators that some progress is being made.
Can I give a quick response? I feel like I'm cutting Amma out.
No, please. Yeah, no, I'm interested.
Okay. So in my translation, I think it's chapter 21, it goes, agility is practical, not mystical, a way of working, not a state of grace. So as far as spiritual is concerned, I think you can't help but try to connect the dots if you're going to translate Lao Tzu, that there are aspects there that are really about a way of flow. And then it sort of leads into practical advice about how you can generate such a way. And then it leads into what to do when you start hitting impediments, whether they are impediments in your community or the impediments induced by a tyrant. So I think it's kind of all of the above. It's not an either or thing.
I think that's a good point. I mean, it's all levels. There's no separation between those things. So like they all bounce back between one another. You know, they're all connected. Yeah, they're all connected. And that's I guess, if forward facing, you know, that's the struggles with agility, when we separate things out and put them into individual boxes. I mean, not time boxes. I mean, you know, just individual concepts.
But if we take what you said, Amma, before seriously, it raises a really interesting agile question, because once the manifesto occurred, there was this sudden rush to certify people, and little armed camps got set up, and political and financial forces began to dominate, and Shuhari, of all things, started to become something that was well regarded, where that had nothing to do with where we started. So I think that it's that state of bogus order and violent imposition of same. The entire history of humanity has been recapitulated by the agile movement over the last 20 years. And I think it's only with this festival that we're beginning to reflect and go, wait a second, is that really what it's supposed to be about?
Hmm.
And it was very interesting seeing. I had some involvement in the first few weeks of the festival, and then it all turned into looking like hard work, and I didn't want to do it anymore. But while I was just sort of interfering at the political level in the early days, it was really interesting to watch the Agile Festival be a microcosm of the Agile movement, with folks like myself saying you need clarity and direction, and being very Confucian about the whole thing, and other people saying if we just get enough smart people in the room, then everything will take care of itself, and all of that played out at the time.
Yeah, how can it not?
Mm.
That's...
I have an idea about how it cannot.
Go on, Peter, tell us.
All right, well, so Dov and Nick know this, but which I think they have if they've looked at the Xscale Alliance Slack this morning, but I don't think that you do, and I don't think anybody else does. I'm kind of telling tales out of school, but I made a suggestion this morning to Sath and to Scott, who are the two motors inside the vehicle of the festival, that very much like a famous Australian festival called the Aquarius Festival, that we simply don't go home again afterwards. Back in 1973, Aquarius was kind of a successor to Woodstock, where Woodstock had ended in well, mud fights and other unpleasant things. About 10,000 people descended on a little country town in northern New South Wales for the Aquarius Festival. And after 10 days of that, they bought about 500 hectares there. And that basically became the matrix for an entire counterculture, and via permaculture, a global influence on the way people do things, because permaculture got its birth there as well.
Oh, I know that community.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Are we talking about Nimbin here, or?
Well, Nimbin, and then Byron, and Mullum, and and Wood, where I had my tea house, and where the donkey was, and so on. Basically, Dov's holding up a thing that says "Shut up." All right,
Yes.
shut up.
Mm.
One, I think we're diverting, and two, I have Diane who wants to intervene in the story, so we might have an audience.
Cool.
Hi all. Well, listening where you all come from was already worth tuning in. Listening to all those four wise men. And so I have lived in Hong Kong and in Singapore. And I was in Singapore in the time when Lee Kuan Yew was really creating the place, using the human resources as there were no other resources. And I learned a lot from him, and also saw the difference every time I came back to Europe about people, living in reaction, living as good soldiers in the corporations. And since then, I've been asking myself questions. I'm not a wise person. I even haven't read the Tao yet. So but I have studied homeopathy and a little bit of traditional Chinese medicine, the Vietnamese part, the simple part. So through that, I got some connections. But whilst you're talking, there is one thing that is striking me. It's nothing to do with Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, but it's to do with the way our brain is put together, our brain functions. And you know that in the books of psychiatrists, there are illnesses that people have. One of them is ADD or ADHD, the attention deficit syndrome, which I happen to have. And so when looking into that literature, very often you see that also from old times there have been the hunters. And then we started farming. And because of the farming, we had to abide by some rules, be patient, and follow rules. Then came Industrial Revolution, and then the rules became, you could just, you only work when you could read the clock, and you had to go to school and so on. Those ADD people were the ones who kept the brain of the hunter. And to me, the hunter is the agile person, because you create drama and chaos anyway. So you've got to cope with it. You come into situations where you do cope and learn. And that's what I feel intuitively. I've been agile. And when I started learning more about agility, felt like, okay, you go and, see that life is a story. And when I heard that, when you said that about this, a story and play with the story, to me, agile is seeing life as a story, nothing fixed. Not a strategy and a vision that you have to, you've got to find the mark. And if you are not beside the mark, then you are, committing a sin, what science is about. But agile is not about arriving where you thought you would arrive. It's about arriving with something valuable, which is different. So I'm just curious about everything, what is coming, but I felt like there is, and the ADD people are just about 10% of the population, but they are the rebels. Often also the salespeople, because that's hunting, but not fitting in the old way. And I think in the agile movement, there is quite a few of those people who are early adapters.
I wanted to say something about this.
Yeah.
First of all, just to make explicit what I heard already, agility, and I like what Amma said, has always been here and always is. Even the most rigid organization is agile, otherwise it wouldn't survive a day. And it's agile in the sense that it reacts to things that have no choice but changing. Any business depends on revenue. It's the oxygen. And the revenue sources are changing. They're never stable. And it depends on the people that are recruited and that are let go, fired, whatever you want to call it. And this is changing all the time. So even the most rigid organization has no choice but to be agile. The thing is, and this is, I think, what part of the agile revolution, agile movement did, is to put a label on it, to say this behavior of responding to change it's a thing. It has a name. It has attributes of its own. And the second thing that I thought of when you spoke, Diane, is whatever attributes such as ADD or stuff like that we give to people, we can also see organization in that way. So I think there are organizations that are more have attention deficit disorder. Okay, they are constantly changing directions. They have a very short span of attention. There are organizations, if you want to go into the other catalog of the DSM, there are organizations that are schizophrenic, and there are organizations that are any a symptom or like any label that you have to give to a person. You can see also organizations that behave in this way as an organization. So that's just a thought that I wanted to throw into the mix.
Absolutely.
Can I take one slight issue with your language, Dov? I don't think ADD is attention deficit disorder. I think it's attention, delight driven, something like that. I mean, it's not that we're bad at attention. We have hyperfocus. We're really good at attention. And so the whole idea that this is some kind of illness that 10% of the population has is something that 90% of the population just has to get over themselves, really. Maybe attention, delight, and diversity. I mean, something like that. It's or maybe we should just go, look, let's never mind ADD. Let's just be upfront about it and say we're Adamses in the sense of the Addams family. We love being ooky, and it's not a matter of we have something wrong with us. It's a matter of we have capabilities that we have to harmonize with the way the agricultural folk like to do their things. And that harmonization that's a responsibility that falls on us. We have some learning to do. It's often really hard learning. But disorder?
No. It's a label. It's a label.
Yeah, and neurodiversity is certainly a topic that is very dear to my heart. I've put into the text chat the name of two authors that people might be interested in. Mikhail Eliade did a comparative history of world religions that had some really interesting findings in it. And so you can look at people who suddenly took off all their clothes and ran around in the snow and had conversations with trees and that sort of stuff. And you can say, it's possible that these people would have been diagnosed with something if they were around today. And the way that it has been interpreted in these ancient societies across the globe is that this person has some sort of magical interaction. And that very frequently the way that society made use of their, because by the time someone is a teenager, you've invested a lot, if you're a tribe, in getting that person into having a healthy adult body, and you don't want to walk away from that investment. And they tended to find that the pattern across the globe is to put these people into highly technical work. They become herbalists and blacksmiths and other very specialized professions. And so when you look at so when you look at today's highly specialized professions, I think that there is an overrepresentation of people who are not typical in the way that they think. And when it comes to the politics of the DSM and that sort of thing, there's a whole 2-hour rabbit hole, and I promised Dov that I wouldn't go too heavily down any technical rabbit holes. The other researcher that I mentioned in the text chat is Michael Harner. He read Eliade, and his theory was that perhaps the reason, because there are these remarkable similarities in spiritual practice among cultures that have not had any contact with each other. And Harner's theory to explain that is that our behavior, there's a selection bias in favor of behaviors that work. And so if you look at a religious ritual that is practiced the same in South America as it is in Finland, it's possibly because it actually works. And so that's the assumption that underlies his work. And that's there's a whole neo-shamanism thing that doesn't necessarily fit well with Confucianism, but it's certainly part of my past, and it's an interesting topic. And yes, I think Michael is right. People get hooked on labels. Even Confucian, like if you're a proper Confucian person, then you're supposed to get really interested in the reasoning behind the ritual and not necessarily worry too much about exactly where whether the ritual implement was supposed to be on the left or the right, as long as you know why you've got that implement there in the first place.
Diane might want to also have a look at the history of the Haudenosaunee in North America, because they had this really neat division of labor between the hunters and the agricultural folk and the people who did the work in the village. There was a very nice division of labor. It was a matriarchal society, so a lot of things made sense that didn't make very much sense in patriarchal societies. To Nick's point, that maybe the reason for these similarities is that, well, they just evolved like that, which kind of goes to Amma's point as well. There is one other possibility, and it might be something associated with the traditions we're talking about. We have very little human history. Our history goes back, well, maybe 5,000 years in just about all these traditions when we're talking written history. Before that, it seems like all we've got is squiggles and handprints and pictures of animals on walls. But when you look at the archaeological record, when you look at big bits of masonry that were done in South America, that were across Europe, across the Middle East, there's a pretty good case to be made that there almost certainly was a very sophisticated global civilization before two catastrophes that occurred about 2,000 years apart, 12,000 and 10,500 years ago, often referred to as the Younger Dryas. So places like, obviously, the Giza Plateau, but Göbekli Tepe, Pumapunku, all of that stuff. It might be that a lot of the reason for the common threads is because there was a common origin.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's this thing on Netflix called The Dig, which is about this archaeological find in England. Interestingly, I was on a retreat there, very close to that area for 3 months, so I know the area really well. And you look at the artwork there; it's phenomenal. The detail of it and where those items came from, all over Sri Lanka, and and this Viking, Saxon ship, just appeared in the middle of the English countryside. I mean, it's phenomenal to see, and yet the distances involved. So yeah, and even from a if I was just to put my Buddhist hat on again, the Ashoka pillars from India, and how the Greek toga is connected to that, and the influence that we have within our society based on Greece is based on really on Ashoka, and quite phenomenal.
Taking it back to China, you've got the Tarim Basin mummies, which are over 10,000 years old, and these mummies are 6 foot to 6'6", red-headed, pale-skinned people wearing tartan.
Yes, yeah. It's like going to Pakistan, up in Gilgit in the mountains. You go there and you see these red-haired people there. They look Scottish, but this is what's so interesting. I'd like to go back to your point, Peter, about why we need this certification stuff, because I think it's really important. Why have we got stuck on that route? What is it about that we need to? Because I see the same in mindfulness. When I stopped being a monk, I went into the whole mindfulness route, and now I rarely use the word. I don't want to get caught up with that scene so much. But there must be something about the human condition that wants us to have that type of formality. The certification, the whole sense of it being something that we should align to, really. And then we getting trapped into that, which actually makes us less agile from the outside.
Yeah, I think that people who don't know how to do something themselves need a way of understanding who it is that can do it. And you get devices. This is the coat that I wore when I was working in the herbal medicine clinic, and I'm terribly pleased it still fits. But you could immediately look at someone and know whether they were employed by the clinic or not. And the supervisors wore white coats, and so everyone very quickly understood that if the red-coated person was telling you one thing and the white-coated person was telling you something else, that you listen to the guy in the white coat. And it's the same reason why I use a registered electrician when I had a power outage in the house. I don't want to electrocute myself. I don't want my house to burn down. I need something that gives me some degree of confidence. And if there's a professional accrediting body that will kick out people who engage in malpractice and ensure that you've got a certain minimum amount of knowledge and that sort of stuff, then I think that it does something that's really good. And one of the things that disappoints me about computer science is that we don't have any professional bodies with teeth. You can't get kicked out of our profession for malpractice. And I can think of a person back when I was working in medical software who should be in jail and is not. And at the very least, they should be barred from the profession.
I can think of several people from different industries I've worked in who should be in jail by rights. I mean, we can make it simpler than that. I don't want unlicensed drivers on the road. I think that would be a bad idea. At the same time, if you look at the origin of automobiles, the way that people started to use them and then needed skills so that they would be able to use them without, as there were more and more of them about, without killing other people. Originally, there was no one to teach you to drive, and there were no established road rules, and it had to evolve. So the shuhari thing is not bad in and of itself, but there's another principle that has to go with it, the muhin shu principle. If you look at both of these principles began in Japanese tea, but muhin shu started. Muhin shu, literally no host, no guest. It's very much like the way this festival is running. We don't have people going, well, you know, I've been here for 20 years, so you listen to me. We have people going, hey, I've got something to share. And other people going, oh, that's an interesting one. And turning up at weird events like this. And we are engaging in mutual benefit. And there are a bunch of links that Nick's just shared that I need to follow up with. And I'm really intrigued by what Diane said. And so I'm learning at the same time as I'm offering things to help people learn. That was really why Japanese tea is so completely different to the tea tradition everywhere else, because without the stuff that Rikyu came up with back at the end of the Sengoku period, we wouldn't have Japanese tea to learn in a rigid, stylized, shuhari, fuhaku manner.
So I'd like to interrupt here just to put a bookmark, because I found myself for about 10 minutes saying, let's shift to the phase of talking about the present. And while I was waiting for a spot to do that, I realized that we already are. So I don't want you to shift everything, but just to note that we are slipping into talking about the present. And the question that I would like to pose, an abstract one, is if these three characters were here today and would see the state of things, agile, not agile, how things work in the world of industry, production, whatever, what would they say out of this perspective about where we are? And this is the question. You don't have to answer it, but I just want you to be inspired by it when we continue.
While we're pausing very briefly, Brent has just made a fantastic observation in the text chat. I want to acknowledge the awesomeness of that, and I'd like to elaborate, but I also want to cooperate with the host and follow the agenda.
So would you mind reading it? Because in the recording, no. Brent, would you mind joining the conversation? And we'll give you a few seconds. Okay. So Nick, would you mind reading it?
Yeah, so Brent writes, it seems to me most of the transactions are process anxiety towards uncertainty, not those for survival, but maybe sometimes with people selling a sense of confidence, and those that bought into it think it helps in harnessing their reality well. And I think that the role of anxiety in terms of the way that our organizations take shape and the way that all of these things happen is something I'm tempted to rant about for hours, but I think it's an excellent point, and it certainly is an important factor in what's going on with certification.
How do you apply that to the electricity man?
So specifically with the electricity ban, when smoke started coming out of the fuse box at the front of my house, I was nervous that my house was going to burn down, and I wanted, and I felt that someone unqualified was likely to make things worse. But I mean, why do we get jobs with people? Why aren't we all self-employed? I think anxiety has a lot to do with that as well, and the way in which we join an organization because we want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, because we've got these very well, these survival enhancing things. Whereas, like, I am safer if I am with other humans. There's good evidence that that's an important part of our biological heritage, and we get scared when we're alone. And then we join massive corporations, and we're constantly terrified of everyone else in the same corporation as us. There are definitely things that we could improve, and I really have to write my book and publish my methodology, and it's time for me to back off, though. Otherwise, I'll go on for hours.
Would you mind starting your book after the session and not during the session?
Exactly. Yes, I'm trying to back off.
So may I suggest that the natural state of affairs is described ably by Robert Anton Wilson as the rising Hodge and the rising Podge. The Hodge being the tendency towards bureaucracy, and the Podge being the tendency towards chaos, and that neither of these are particularly good things. What we're really looking for is social learning. We want to collaborate on learning. We want the ability to share learning with other people in our organizations to make it more likely that those organizations won't fail catastrophically and then lead to hardship for us personally, which I think all of us have experienced. So they're not necessarily safety in numbers. So there is a distressing number that has been in the last 4 years. It's kind of slightly hidden in the most recent State of Agile survey, but the last 4 years, the State of Agile survey has had this question around, does Agile help your organization adapt to changing market conditions? And the numbers wibbled and wobbled between 4 and 7% of respondents say that Agile helps their organization adapt to changing market conditions. So the answer to Dov's original question, is what would our heroes say about this? Is they'd say we're stuffed, and we need to course correct. Which I sort of I'm hoping is going to come out of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival.
So I'm not sure. Like, when I think of the Lao Tzu that I understand, he would say it is what it is. We're not stuck. We're there, right? And the sense of stuckness is what gets us stuck. No.
I would agree with you partly. I think that there is certainly a recognition that decay and renewal are hodge and podge, if you like, are very to be expected natural things. But I would also suggest the advice in Lao Tzu is around how we can increase the flow of learning so that nothing need be done, but everything is done.
Amarantho, before I monopolize things further, how do you think the Buddha might perceive the current situation?
Well, I mean, if you look, if I was to put my scriptural hat on for just a bit, although I didn't do that much of it, they're just old stories again. So it's all been there, I remember one story I read about, there was a war and the Buddha was asked to go there, and he said, well, not really. There's not much I can do about it. And then there was another one about the monk. He told the monks eating's not good or something like that. They all fasted to death. Oh no, sorry. Excuse me. They said he gave them the Asuba practice, which is looking at dead bodies, and then they all committed suicide because they saw their bodies as ugly. And then other times he went and he was able to give a talk, and the people that came to those talks were called listeners. That's what the word translates to in English. And then everybody got enlightened, because they were sort of ready. So it's not it's not new phenomena. The way that, you know, what's happening with agility, but I think our capacity to reflect and think these things through is new, just because of the way that we've developed our intellectual capacity. Maybe is very different from those times, and I think we've got, you know, is also a great opportunity. I mean, just like you said, you know, the numbers of murders and all that have gone down. Why have they gone down? Because we are learning. And so it's how, and I agree with Peter, you know, how can we make the social learning without competition or that the priority? Because, well, I mean, I don't know, I think you can somehow see it with these pandemic times. You know, how is it suddenly we can generate all these brilliant ideas in a short period of time because we're not worried about the money? A lot of the rules have just been dropped because they want it. And so we get the innovation that we want, sort of thing. The thing is how can we sort of scale that to all aspects of society, you know, and have it. Although I must say I didn't see it in the monastery, and that was a pretty good environment. But that's probably why I'm not there. Yeah.
I think that's what Nick said about the organization of the festival reflects the real messiness and not the ideals that we try to follow.
Yeah.
And I think that this tension between the two is a beautiful thing, because otherwise we wouldn't have an adventure, right? If we come to a place that is totally ready to change, that is totally connected to reality and ideals, and aligned on everything, then our job would be boring, right? So thank God that there is a place for us to set things in a more harmonious motion. And I don't think we can expect, I don't know anyone, I think, who is totally congruent, who is totally behaving in the way that they preach. And this leaves the big space for change. Once you're congruent, the challenge is gone. The fun of living ceases to be, because you reached the place where you want to go.
That's
I don't know if it
agility.
makes sense.
That's ultimate agility, though. That is it, when all that goes.
I think, but agility, and again, I'll fall back to Taoism because this is the one I know the best.
Yeah.
Agility is a journey, it's not a destination. And once you reach your destination, where is your journey?
That's the limitation of language. Yeah. We have to use a word to convey something, but because otherwise we wouldn't be here. But it's a limitation of the word itself. I agree with what you're saying, you know. But, and
I like
even agree is a word.
yeah, that's right. I mean, this is the struggle, isn't it? You know, like we split the pie up, haven't we? We split the water up, and all these concepts.
I like the idea of agility as a social force. And I think where Amma was going, that agility is something that is critical, not just to business, but to society over the next, well, not just with COVID. I mean, obviously, right now, we're looking at unprecedented VUCA everywhere.
Yeah.
But even if it hadn't been for COVID, there are about a dozen different technological innovations that are going to change things over the next decade or two until society is unrecognizable. I'm doing a session on that, quick plug, in about 10 hours, agile in space. But that idea of agility as a way for society to adapt and for as a guiding principle, I think that's something that is not seen in most of our agile culture at the moment. We're not talking about how do we get governments to have agility? How do we bring this to the masses? I think it's missing.
I run agile in schools with young people. Never have a problem with self-organizing. Rarely. So this is the thing, do one of the classical agile Scrum type games, get them to self-organize and all that. Never had a problem with it.
Yep.
Like,
And
they
I
don't
think,
have all the concepts to block it. Do you know what? They just
yeah,
slot
yeah.
into it.
and I think
Yeah.
this is a part of the riddle of why things, organizations, teams, whatever, not agile, is not because they can't, but because of the imposition. Because someone tries to put them in order.
Yeah. So
I see.
It's struggling.
Yeah, I mean, because Peter and Dov, you've both been there when I have successfully, or to some extent at least, successfully imposed order on a situation. And I do believe that it is sometimes necessary. I'll return to the previous question that I didn't answer the first time around, in terms of how would Confucius see things at the moment. I think that when we started having formal methods and so forth, we were sort of starting to invent a set of rituals for programming and software development. And I think that we didn't teach them very well, and therefore people didn't understand why those rituals were being performed. And so you had the ritual of the Gantt chart. And my dad has a fantastic saying about it. It's an eye test. How long can you look at it before all the bars slide to the right? And one of the things that has kind of broken in today's society to a large extent, I think, is the and I realize today's society is an ironic thing for me to say, but there is a disconnect between generations that is actually at least as old as the ancient Greeks. Kids today don't listen is somehow a realization that every generation comes to when it turns 40. And I think that we do need to help kids to listen and perhaps be better elders in some ways, and to earn the respect of the young professionals and kids today, and to point out that the reason why, it took me 10 years after I first got my job as a programmer to realize that they weren't actually employing me in order to give me a creative outlet for my brilliant technical talent. They were employing me because they had problems that they wanted solved, and they thought that I was going to help if they gave me money. And I look at a lot of the things that happen in the agile movement and that sort of thing today, and I think these guys are making the same mistakes as I used to make, and I have no idea how to stop them.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with things like the clean code software craftsmanship movement, where it's an exercise in blaming the technical folk for management problems. And the management problems evolve from the reward models that are embedded in the organizations. If you suggest that to the programmers will go, great, we can do something about those reward models. We could program better ones. And it's a really empowering thing to do, rather than going, the problem is that you guys are just not spending your weekends and evenings refactoring. You're going home and seeing your families. What are you doing that for?
There are abusive employment practices. That is true. Yeah.
It might not even be abusive. It might just be stupid. Abuse comes from stupidity and power.
Yeah, I guess my point is that the people at the bottom of the power hierarchy also have ways of being stupid, and the problem is, and because I do believe in command responsibility, you always have to blame the people at the top, no matter who it is that's making the proximal mistake, because the people at the top are the ones that it's useful to hold accountable. But my work is very much about how do you fix the control systems so that you actually got meaningful information flow, and that the direction that you're trying to set at the top of an organization actually flows through in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
So you just said something that triggers me. You used the word that triggers me. So thank you for this. Every time that someone uses the word blame, there is like something like this bell that rings in my head. And I think that if we replace blame with responsibility and define responsibility as the ability to respond, then it's much more flexible way of seeing how to change things, because the responsibility for change is with anyone who can respond. So if I can do something about the situation, then it's my responsibility. And responsibility is usually in my hands and not for me to give to someone, right? Responsibility can be taken, but it can't be given. If you feel that you can't do anything about it, then you're not responsible. And that was the trigger, and thank you for this. And in this sense, I think it's a shared responsibility of anyone in the ecosystem to do what they can to shift the ecosystem into a place that they feel is better. And again, I won't talk about better a lot, but the word, okay. But this is the like the small trigger I had, and I thank you for this.
So go on,
ahead.
Nick. It's fine.
Okay. So I think that the key part of your response that I want to focus on is the words "to do what they can," and the reality of most organizations is that there are people who have more tools available to them than others, and so while what you're saying is a very good sentiment that promotes a sense of responsibility that is very desirable, I believe that the people who have more tools do have more responsibility, and in a typically hierarchical organization, the people at the top have more tools.
I would like to suggest that as agile coaches, we have the tools to affect the people at the top of the organization, even though we might not think of us as being at the top of the organization. I think that the ability to help define the rules of the game, whether we're talking about KPIs or OKRs or DRIs, directly responsible individuals, that the ability to introduce these things at all levels of an organization, there's really only one group of people who can do that, and that's us as agilists. So if we look at an organization as a game rather than as a hierarchy, then yeah, there's going to be some people who are winning that game and they are kind of at the top at the moment, but there is a constant change going on in the organization and the rules of the game. There are some really neat principles we can bring to that: open book management, throughput accounting, all of the stuff that we often go on about in Xscale, descaling, that make for a game that's not just more equitable, but produces better outcomes, better learning flows, and without disrupting hierarchy per se.
As we have 9 minutes to end, I would love to open the stage to our guests. Would you like to intervene, ask, comment? I'd love to know if what we talked about so far echoes in you.
So reading the text chat, Diane observes, give tools to people who are not at the top, and indeed expertise and trust are also ways of getting yourself some more tools. Yeah, yeah. I'm either going to go for 2 hours or just stop now.
Sam was about to have a go, I think.
I just want to say that I don't know the Eastern religions that well. I mean, the most I know in concerning agility is wabi sabi, which I don't know if you guys know wabi sabi. I think Kent Beck mentioned that early in the extreme programming literature, and then so I think that's obviously something that I've taken to heart. And for those who don't know it, wabi sabi is the Japanese philosophy that nothing's finished, nothing is permanent, and nothing is perfect, which is kind of, that's about as big a link as I get it with Eastern philosophy. But I've been struck recently. I'm currently working through a systems thinking program at Open University, and looking at the early systems thinkers, it strikes me that a lot of them had already the agile values that were formulated 20 years ago. And there was even one part where they're talking about drawing diagrams collaboratively, which was just like, it was event storming. It was user story mapping that was written about 40 years ago.
Mhm.
So I think there's definitely a big history behind everything we're doing. And we just kind of rebranded something that already existed and put a specificity of software on it.
Yeah, now that the writing is on the wall for the agile movement, is that's how I see it. But if you believe that the agile is that the writing is on the wall, then now is the time to invent an entirely new terminology for the same ideas and repackage it. And I'm sure that there's someone out there right now who's unaware of history and doing exactly that.
Mhm.
So Beck said that a lot of extreme programming was stuff that he learned from his dad, because his dad was an engineer. So you're exactly right. It does go back a long way. And I dare say that a lot of his dad's influences we could wind up tracing back to earlier craft traditions. As far as the writing being on the wall, don't see it. I think that as an influence on the way people work, Agile has been enormously successful. Agile did begin, speaking as someone who was there at the stand-up in the Mediterranean about 6 to 9 months after the XP2K conference, 6 to 9 months before Snowbird. And Dave Thomas, the rounder Dave Thomas, or he's then the rounder Dave Thomas, turned up and with a pamphlet from the Rational people and said, look, Rational Unified Process is about to support extreme programming. We've got to rebrand this thing, guys. And it's my recollection that was Alistair Coburn who said, well, what about Agile? I was pushing for evolutionary, but that didn't fly. Alistair swears that it was Mike Beadle. I don't know who it was, but the idea of coming up with a way of packaging ideas that are really about responding to change, being adaptive, the old ideas, the traditions that we're talking about. If we can come up with better ways to package them, great. But right now, I don't see a reason to say, oh, let's throw that particular body out the window. I do see a reason for us to go, yeah, it's producing some pretty bad outcomes. Let's apply it to itself and refactor it and improve it and find out what's missing and find out what's broken. And I think there's a lot of missing and broken things we could talk about outside of the context of the Eastern philosophies or religions. There are religious aspects, there are philosophical aspects. I'm not particularly interested in religious aspects, but there are religious aspects to the agile world. When we start looking at people saying, oh, I believe in Scrum or I believe in SAFe, that's a religious statement.
We have here a comment saying, isn't this what Agile 2.0 is all about? Which makes me curious, what is Agile 2.0?
I never heard of it.
Well, I mean, it's a way of distancing yourself from the past with a new label, which, I mean, one of the things that drives me mad is that almost everyone who criticizes the waterfall model doesn't actually describe the waterfall model when they're describing the thing that they hate.
Yes.
If people actually understood the formal methods that they were railing against, they would say, oh, well, that's actually perfectly sensible. Let's do that.
It was quite an agile model for its day.
Yeah.
Then it got perverted by the military when they wanted to get their contracts written, and that was the end of that.
I'm not familiar enough with the various, but I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people. I've seen, like, so if we go back only as far as 98, when design patterns was the thing, I went to so many presentations on the singleton pattern where the person had very clearly, A, not properly understood the singleton pattern, and B, decided to do a presentation on the first chapter of the book. The strategy pattern is a far more valuable pattern. It's towards the end of the book, and most people just didn't get that far.
Yeah.
Okay. We have, I think, formally 2 minutes. We can stretch it into 5. And I would love to hear your closure about this talk. And perhaps I'll start. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. When I had this idea, I didn't really have a clear plan. I just had a kernel of a starting point. And looking back into the hour and a half that we just passed, for me, it was a great example of how things can emerge if you let them. So I'm grateful to have you guys here to create this space. And I think for me at least, we demonstrated the emergence and agility. So this is my thank you for you.
Yeah,
Anyone?
I enjoyed that part of it as well, and I've also learned a lot because I don't know so much about the history and how it all came. So listening to all these things has really helped me, and also I have just with my Buddhist hat on again, I just hear the same stories that I read in the Buddhist scriptures. Rules or not rules, or agile or not agile, or unified or not unified. So it's kind of reassuring in a way. Here we are again. So thank you all. It's been lovely. And the questions as well. Yeah.
I'll thank you, Peter, before you thank me. And I'll thank Amarato. I've got this competitive thing with Peter, you may have noticed. And Amarato and Dov, thank you very much. I think it's been delightful. There is a comment that I was planning to repeat from my Chinese medicine instructors who said, use Buddhism when you want to be less unhappy, use Taoism when you want to be more happy. And he didn't talk about Confucianism at all. And what I didn't realize until much later is that we were all there studying really hard and trying to get things right. And they didn't talk to us about Confucianism because you don't talk to fish about water. We were just swimming in it all the time.
Okay. So Taoism began as a reaction, in some ways began as a reaction against Confucianism. But there is a really neat Buddhist story that I think might not be a bad one to finish with. And it might go to where the Agile movement as a whole needs to go. So the question about Agile 2.0. It's actually a koan for those who are fond of koan practice in a Buddhist monastic sense. For those who have never heard of it, a koan is basically a riddle where the answer involves you changing who you are. But there's this neat one about you get a baby goose, a gosling, and an empty sake bottle, a big sake bottle, and you poke it down through the neck of the bottle until it's inside, and you feed it through the neck of the bottle, which of course in reality you could never do, until it's a full-grown goose, but its head sticking out. And the koan is, without killing the goose or breaking the bottle, how do you get the goose out of the bottle?
So just to repeat the image that I have, because your English is perhaps too rich for some people. You grow a goose inside a bottle until it's fully grown.
Yeah, but its head sticking out.
And its head is out. And the question is, how do you get it alive out of the bottle without breaking it?
Yeah, without breaking the bottle or killing the goose. How do you get the goose out of the bottle?
Okay.
And so this was a question that I never had a good solution to. I mean, there's a book of answers to koans, which are notoriously not very helpful. And the answer to that one is, it's out. So I didn't find that helpful until, as an Agile coach, I was faced with a group of about 330 back in 2010 in a very hidebound conservative organization where every time I suggested Agile, I was there to coach Agile, would work in a particular way, the person on the other side of the desk would go, yeah, mate, yeah, that's it. But we'll never get them to do it. And there was a lot of this sort of blamestorming thing going on. We'll never get them to do it. They were talking about each other, of course. So they were all both the goose and the bottle. And to cut another long story short, I came to the realization that the answer to the koan and the answer to that organization is to take a baby goose outside the bottle and feed it until there's a full-grown goose and it flies away. Which is to say, when we are trying to work with these organizations, rather than trying to change the organization or help the people who are stuck in the organization, if instead we take the approach of trying to grow the kernel of a new organization using the sponsorship that we've got from our change sponsors and demonstrate that that's working in the small. We don't need to change any existing teams or streams. We can grow that. And that proved to be an enormously valuable, useful way. I applied that to a 50,000 person organization about 4 years later and got a really good outcome. Maybe that's what we need to bring to Agile culture. It's not a matter of Agile 2.0, which will be breaking the bottle. It's more a matter of saying, well, okay, given what we've got, how do we grow an Agile culture, a kernel of that, from where we are, from the spot under our feet? And that's where the Agile 20 Reflect Festival for me is enormously valuable as an opportunity to form a learning ecosystem or the kernel of one, demonstrate its value and grow it until all of the old stuff about certificates and the frameworks, all of that stuff is just kind of forgotten and we fly away.
And it's out. It's a great way to end this session. And I'd like to waste this moment because I'd like to take 1 more minute for participants to just reflect on what happened here in the last 90 minutes. And if you can share with us in a short sentence or a few words, what are you left with? I'm curious for that. And if you can't talk, you can put it in the chat, but I would rather hear your voice.
I'm going to very quickly say, Peter, that's not actually koan study, and mutter about cultural appropriation, and then I'm going to shut up.
Beautiful, Nick. Go with that.
So someone said, Brandt said, confusion, but profound.
I feel that these were worthwhile 90 minutes, totally different than what I expected. And I take away a lot. Some of it was already in me, but the mixture of what you gave and what I have together is richer. Thank you.
I agree with what Diane said. And I would just say that it's just a reaffirmation that everything old is new again, and that there's Agile's nothing really is a formulation of what we already knew or what we had known and maybe forgotten, but all ancient philosophy.
We've put the rest of them to sleep, Dov.
Oh, no, it didn't. They just type, you see.
Oh, it's a lovely comment.
Yeah. So you see, Michael said the need to connect and build things together to the betterment of society and ourselves. And Maru said just thanks everyone for today. So perhaps these are the words that we'll end with. Thanks everyone for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You're around.
Bye.